Part 1 Rewritten, meaning 100% preserved. My name is Paige Tanner. I'm 34 years old, and I discovered what my family truly thought of me while lying in a hospital bed. Just 6 weeks earlier, I had welcomed my baby daughter, Nora, into the world. Then, while driving home after a late shift, a truck ran a red light on Fax and slammed into my car. When I regained consciousness, I had 3 fractured ribs, a collapsed lung, and my right arm was wrapped in a cast. My husband, Daniel, was in Seattle, nearly 6 hours away from getting back home. Our newborn needed someone to care for her that very night, and my mother lived only 20 minutes from a hospital. She refused. She said a single sentence to Daniel, and that sentence changed everything. "Your sister never has these kind of emergencies." At that very moment, my sister was enjoying a Caribbean cruise, while my mother was spending the evening at a casino. What I chose to do from that hospital bed over the next 3 minutes would eventually reshape the next 9 years of our lives and involve $486,000. But even that wasn't what shattered my family. The moment that truly broke them came 3 hours later, when an elderly man carrying a worn, weathered folder stepped into my hospital room and spoke words none of them ever imagined hearing. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, the place where quiet people finally settle old accounts. If someone has ever mistaken your kindness and reliability for something they could endlessly take advantage of, then this story is for you. Leave a comment and tell me who was truly there for you when life knocked you down. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. It all began with a phone call. I was slowly coming out of anesthesia in a curtained emergency room bay. The first thing I noticed was a heavy cast weighing down my right arm and the plastic hospital wristband fastened around my left wrist. A nurse kept repeating my name, as though she'd already called it several times before I finally responded. Every breath sent pain through my ribs. It felt as if an entire car had been resting on my chest. Daniel's phone was on speaker beside my pillow. His voice had that calm, measured tone he always used whenever he was frightened, but trying desperately not to sound frightened. "Paige, the babysitter can't stay after 11. I called your mom." Before he finished speaking, I already knew the answer. "She won't come." There was a brief silence. In the background, I could clearly hear the unmistakable sound of slot machines, the electronic chimes, excited voices, and the cheerful music that plays when someone wins. My mother was at a casino in Black Hawk with her friends. She told Daniel she couldn't drive to the hospital because she had promised to look after my sister Megan's cat while Megan was away on a cruise. A cat, my 6-week-old daughter, needed someone for one night, and her answer was a cat. I didn't cry. That's important to understand because everyone expects a woman lying injured in a hospital bed to fall apart. I didn't. I simply looked at the identification band on my wrist, reached over with my left hand, picked up my phone from the bedside tray, and started handling what needed to be done. I had always been good at solving problems. Looking back, that was probably my greatest weakness. To understand why my family treated me the way they did, you need to know who I was before that night. I grew up in a small rented duplex in Aurora where the heating worked only when it felt like cooperating. I paid my way through community college by working late shifts at a grocery store before earning a scholarship and transferring into a finance program that no one in my family really understood. By the time I turned 30, I had become a senior financial analyst at a Fortune 500 company downtown. Whenever absolute accuracy mattered, I was a person they trusted. Numbers were my profession. Unlike people, numbers never played favorites, and they never lied. Daniel and I got married when I was 26. We intentionally delayed having children, partly because we wanted to, but mostly because my family always seemed to need something first. We lived modestly. 2 steady incomes. 1 used car. No debt. That simple lifestyle made everything I'm about to tell you possible. For 9 straight years, I quietly sent my parents $4,500 every single month. I never admitted that amount to anyone. Not Daniel, not my sister, not another living soul. I convinced myself it was necessary because of my father's heart condition and their mortgage payments. I believed I was the only dependable person strong enough to carry that responsibility. Eventually, being the dependable one became my entire identity. I'm telling you this because there's an important difference. I wasn't foolish. I was responsible to the point that I erased myself. That night, I finally understood the cost of that. The very first thing I did wasn't revenge. It was solving the immediate problem, because that's simply who I was. Using my left thumb, I opened the contact information for a licensed overnight newborn care agency that Daniel and I had researched before Nora was born. Even though we'd never needed to use it, a woman answered on the second ring. In fewer than 10 comm sentences, I explained my name, where I was, my address, and exactly what I needed. I need an overnight nurse for my 6-week-old daughter tonight, as soon as possible. She asked one question. Is the baby medically stable? She's perfectly healthy. I replied, I'm the one in the hospital. 40 minutes later, a night nurse named Yvette entered our home using the security code Daniel had provided. She washed her hands, settled Nora, and texted me a photo of my daughter sleeping peacefully with her tiny fist resting against her cheek. I stared at that picture for a long time. The ER nurse beside me gently asked, Do you have any family who can come? It's handled, I answered. Next. She blinked. People always do when you refuse to have the emotional breakdown they're expecting. I wasn't being heartless. I was prioritizing. The way you do after spending your entire life being the only responsible adult in a room full of adults. My daughter was safe. She was warm. She was cared for. My husband was already on his way home. My ribs would eventually heal. Only one unfinished task remained that night. It was something I had carried on my shoulders for 9 long years, but had never allowed myself to question. Now, with my left hand free and my thoughts clearer than ever, I opened The login screen glowed in the dark hospital room like a small, cold moon. When I opened the banking app, I went straight to the section labeled Recurring Transfers. There were 4 automatic payments waiting for me. I knew every one of them by memory, the same way you remember an old scar. The first was simply labeled Mom and Dad, $2,000 every month. The second read home, $1,100, money I believed was helping pay their mortgage. The third was Dad Medical, $900. The last one was Megan Support, $500. Altogether, that added up to $4,500 every month after month, for 108 consecutive months. I had created the first transfer when I was 25, after my father called me in tears over a hospital bill. From that day forward, I never let myself calculate the total amount I'd given them. Somehow, seeing the real number felt like opening a door I would never be able to close again. But that night, I forced myself to look. The app didn't hesitate. $486,000. Almost $500,000 had quietly disappeared from my life through automatic payments, while my mother proudly told relatives that they managed everything on their own. I tapped cancel on the first transfer. A green confirmation appeared. Recurring transfer canceled. I canceled the second, then the third, then the fourth. 4 taps. Less than 20 seconds. And just like that, 9 years of financial support ended as effortlessly as turning off a faucet. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel heartbroken. Only a strange, emotionless clarity. The same feeling you get when a complicated spreadsheet finally balances perfectly. As I was about to close the app, something caught my attention in the transaction history. An entry I'd never noticed before. Buried beneath the payments marked Dad Medical was a transaction from 2 years earlier. It read, Loan M, $40,000. Not my father's surgery. Megan. I locked my phone and stared into the darkness while the heart monitor quietly counted each beat. For the first time in 9 years, I forced myself to ask the question I'd spent years avoiding. Why had I kept doing this? Most people would say I was simply a people pleaser desperate to earn love. They'd be wrong. Anyone who's always been a dependable one already understands the truth. Somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that being needed meant being secure. As long as everyone depended on me, no one could push me out of their lives. My grandmother realized that long before I ever did. Her name was Ruth, my mother's mother. She was a tall, strong woman who always smelled faintly of coffee and machine oil. She never had to raise her voice to command a room. The Thanksgiving before she passed away, she squeezed my hand and quietly told me, Someone has to protect this family's money. Your mother won't. That responsibility will fall to you. Back then, I thought she meant I should always be generous. Now I believe she meant something entirely different. She was warning me to stay alert. Grandma Ruth passed away peacefully in her sleep the previous spring. At the time, I was overwhelmed by my pregnancy and an exhausting quarter at work, so I never asked what she left behind or who inherited it. I simply assumed my mother had taken care of everything, just as I had assumed my money was paying for my father's medical treatment. My entire life, I had given people the benefit of the doubt, even when they had never earned it. I called that love, lying in that hospital bed, knowing my 6-week-old daughter was 40 minutes away being cared for by a complete stranger. I finally understood something painful. I hadn't been supporting my actual family. I'd been financing the fantasy of the family I wished I had. The real family had chosen a cat over me. A little while later, Daniel called again during his layover. This time he repeated every word my mother had said, exactly as she'd said it. He knew I would want every detail. He told me he had called her around 9 o'clock, explained that I was in surgery, that Nora needed someone, and begged her to drive the 20 minutes to our house. According to Daniel, she let out one of her long, dramatic sighs before answering. She claimed she simply couldn't leave because Megan was finally enjoying a vacation she'd always dreamed of, and someone had to stay with the cat. Then she added, besides, Paige always lands on her feet. And finally she repeated the sentence that would stay with me forever. Your sister never has emergencies like this. As though the truck had checked our family's hierarchy before crashing into me. As though my newborn daughter could wait until Megan's cruise ended before needing her mother. Daniel's voice cracked while he told me everything. I calmly reminded him to breathe. I assured him Nora was safe. I assured him I would be okay. Then I told him to get on his flight home. After we hung up, I opened Instagram, a rare habit for me. The first story belonged to Megan. She was smiling beside a crystal blue resort pool, holding a coconut drink beneath bright Caribbean sunshine. The caption read, "Finally living my best life. My 29-year-old sister dreamed of becoming an influencer. She had around 11,000 followers and a monthly allowance of $500, which she seemed to believe appeared by magic." I didn't leave a comment. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. Instead, I opened my messages and sent 3 simple words to someone I almost never contacted. Grandpa H, we should talk. The typing bubbles appeared almost instantly. It felt as though he'd been waiting years for that message. Maybe he had. I expected Grandpa Harold to reply with a text. Instead, my phone started ringing. It was a FaceTime call. Not from him. From the middle of the Caribbean Sea. It was Megan. I answered using my left hand, half my face hidden in the darkness of the hospital room. She didn't notice the hospital ceiling. She didn't notice the cast on my arm. She didn't ask why I was lying down in the middle of the night. Instead, she laughed. "Paige, finally." She held the phone so close that all I could really see was her sunburned nose. Then she complained, "My car got declined at the spa. It was so embarrassing." I said nothing. As always, she rushed to fill the silence herself. Mom said the family account always pays for me. Then came the question that exposed everything. Did you change something? The family account. That's what my sister called it. She genuinely believed the $500 she received every month came from some shared Reynolds family fund, a pool of money my mother managed. She had no idea that every dollar came from me. For 9 years, my mother had made sure she never found out. Keeping my voice calm, I asked, "Do you even know I was in a car accident?" There was a pause. "Wait, what? Are you seriously being dramatic right now?" Behind her, I could hear a steel drum band playing somewhere on the cruise ship. "Can you just fix my card? We dock in Cozumel tomorrow, and I have a photo shoot." A photo shoot. I simply told her I'd look into it. That part was true. Then I said I had to go. That was true, too. I ended the call before she could say anything else and lay back in the dark hospital room, the sound of those steel drums still echoing in my ears. The truth was, Megan wasn't intentionally cruel. In many ways, she was something even more dangerous. She had spent her entire life believing the well would never run dry because no one had ever shown her who was carrying the bucket. The next morning, I was moved into a regular hospital room. That's when my phone began buzzing nonstop. The notifications were coming from our family group chat. Reynolds' family, which included a dozen relatives, mostly aunts and cousins who rarely spoke. I almost never opened that conversation, but the constant alerts finally got my attention. Against my better judgment, I tapped the screen. My mother had been busy. An hour earlier, she'd posted a long message that began, "I'm heartbroken to say that Paige is being dramatic again and has spitefully cut off her struggling parents." She went on to describe my father's fragile health. She reminded everyone how much they had sacrificed for me. She claimed she had no idea how they would afford his medication now. Then, for the audience, she added the same lie she'd been telling for years. "We've always managed on our own, but this is just cruel." There was again the exact same lie, only this time it wasn't displayed inside my banking app. It was being performed on a public stage. "We've always managed on our own." For 9 years, she repeated those words to relatives while quietly cashing my transfers at the beginning of every month. My Aunt Carol had already replied with 3 broken heart emojis followed by, "Shame on her," kicking a sick man while he's already suffering. One of my cousins added a pair of praying hands. No one in that group knew the truth, because the truth had never been invited into the conversation. For a moment, I felt a familiar urge rise inside me. The instinct to defend myself, to explain, to soften everyone's feelings the way I'd spent my entire life doing. Instead, I turned my phone face down. Explaining belonged to the old version of me. The woman I had become after the accident wanted something different, something colder, something factual. She wanted the numbers to speak for themselves. And I knew exactly where to find them. At 11 the next morning, Daniel finally walked into my hospital room. He looked exhausted. His beard had grown in. His clothes were wrinkled, and the fatigue on his face made him look years older. He carried Nora in her infant car seat with a diaper bag hanging from one shoulder. He had flown straight home, relieved a vet, and driven directly to the hospital. He placed the car seat beside my bed. Then he looked at me, really looked, at the cast, at the bruises spreading across my jaw. His eyes immediately filled with tears. I quietly asked him not to cry, because if he started, I knew I would too, and I still had things to do. Carefully, he lifted Nora from the car seat and placed her against my chest, making sure not to hurt my broken ribs. For a few peaceful minutes, the 3 of us simply breathed together. Out of everything that happened that week, that was the one moment I would gladly live again. Then my phone rang. It was my father, Roy Reynolds, 64 years old, the man whose heart treatments I believed I had been paying for over the last 9 years. His voice sounded weak, almost trembling. "Paige." He used a childhood nickname he hadn't called me in decades. I didn't realize things had gotten this bad. The accident, the money, I honestly didn't know. For one suspended moment, I believed him. I believed this might finally be the moment he stood up for himself. "I never wanted you carrying all of this alone," he whispered. I heard him take a long breath, the kind a person takes right before making a life-changing decision. Then another voice broke the silence. My mother's. Sharp, quiet, demanding. She asked who he was talking to. The line suddenly became muffled, as though he covered the phone with his hand. When he returned a few seconds later, his voice was completely different. Flat, defeated, withdrawn. "I should let you rest. Feel better." And then he hung up. That single phone call perfectly described my father. He was a decent man who had spent 4 decades believing the safest way to survive inside that house was to stay silent. That afternoon, Daniel brought my laptop to the hospital and set it on the rolling table beside my bed. Then I did the one thing that had always calmed me whenever life became chaotic. I built a spreadsheet. Using only my left hand and a great deal of patience, I logged into my bank account, downloaded 9 years of statements, and imported every transaction into a pivot table. Analyzing financial data was what I did every day for a billion-dollar company. Surely I could do the same for my own life. I sorted every dollar of the $486,000 according to where it had actually gone. Slowly, row by row, the truth began to reveal itself. It looked nothing like the story my mother had spent years telling our relatives. The mortgage payments I believed I'd been covering every month? Over 9 years, only 10 actual mortgage payments had been made, not 108. The genuine medical expenses for my father's heart, the cardiologist visits, prescriptions, and treatments, added up to only about $65,000 over the entire 9-year period, which left one enormous question. Where had the remaining $421,000 gone? I filtered the records by withdrawal location and transaction date. Immediately, a pattern appeared. Hundreds of cash withdrawals. Small amounts, always close together. Nearly all of them originated within a 2-mile radius of the same zip code. I opened a map. The zip code belonged to Blackhawk. That meant my mother's casino trips hadn't been occasional outings. They'd been a routine. For nearly 10 years, she had been gambling with my money while proudly telling family members she supported herself. Another stream of transactions branched away from the casino withdrawals. Smaller, consistent, purposeful, year after year. Every trail led to one person, Megan. I leaned back as far as my broken ribs would allow and let the numbers tell the story. Because unlike my family, numbers had never lied to me. I'll give you the exact figures because everything that happened afterward depended on them. Out of the $486,000 I'd sent, around $65,000 paid for my father's legitimate medical care. Roughly $11,000 actually reached the mortgage. That meant nearly $410,000 had disappeared somewhere else. The money divided into 2 clear streams. The first stream totaled about $290,000 over 9 years. It consisted of small cash withdrawals made near Blackhawk. Each withdrawal was modest enough that none would ever raise suspicion on its own. The second stream led directly to my sister, approximately $120,000. Included in that amount was a mysterious $40,000 transfer labeled Loan M. It had been hidden inside the dad medical category, the one expense I would never question. That money had never gone towards surgery. It had paid for Megan's personal brand, a leased SUV, professional photography sessions in Tulum, a year spent pretending to build an influencer career. I printed the entire financial summary onto a single sheet of paper using the hospital unit's printer. 1 page, 12 rows, 9 years of lies reduced to a single document. Then Daniel handed me something else. While scrolling through the family group chat, he had taken a screenshot of an older message my mother had sent to Aunt Carol. It read, "We paid for Megan's brand ourselves. That's what good parents do. We paid for it ourselves." I stared at that screenshot. Then I looked back at my printed spreadsheet. Something inside me became completely still. I wasn't going to send angry messages. I wasn't going to defend myself. I wasn't going to argue. Instead, I would let the paperwork speak. I would place the facts in front of the exact audience my mother had been performing for all these years. Then I would walk away and never finance the performance again. "It's handled," I quietly told Daniel. For the first time, those words didn't sound like emergency damage control. They sounded like a final judgment. Before I continue, let me say something. If you've stayed with me this far, there's a chance you're the kind of person I'm talking about. For 9 years, I believed I was paying for my father's heart treatments. In reality, I had been paying for casino visits and influencer photo shoots. If you've ever sent money simply because someone asked you to trust them, tonight, open just one bank statement. Read it as though it belongs to a stranger. Sometimes distance reveals what loyalty hides. And if this story feels painfully familiar, stay with me. Because in the next chapter, my grandfather walks into my hospital room. And what he tells me changes everything I thought I knew about my mother. My mother realized the money had stopped the same way she noticed everything else. Only after it affected her. The first day of the month arrived. No deposit appeared. By lunchtime, my phone displayed her name. I ignored the first 2 calls. When she called a third time, I answered. Avoiding difficult conversations belonged to the old version of me. The moment I picked up, her voice flowed through the speaker, sweet, comforting, almost homemade. It was the same pleasant voice she reserved for relatives, neighbors, and restaurant servers. "Honey, are you okay?" We've been so worried about you and the baby. Worried. That was the word she chose. We've been so worried about you. Those words came from the same woman who had chosen a cat over her own granddaughter. I simply replied that I was recovering and thanked her. There was a brief pause. Then I heard the familiar shift. The warmth slowly disappeared, replaced by the tone I'd known my entire life. I noticed the money didn't arrive this month. Was there some kind of problem with the bank? I calmly told her there hadn't been any mistake. Silence. Then, right on cue, came the guilt. After everything your father and I have done for you, we drove you to every practice. We kept a roof over your head. I let her continue. She eventually reached for the one weapon that had always worked before. Her voice softened, almost as if she were the wounded one. You know, your sister never has emergencies like this. There was again, the third time I'd heard those exact words in only 3 days. Only this time, I didn't react. I didn't defend myself. I simply answered, I know, Mom. But this time, the sentence meant something completely different. Megan never had emergencies, because whenever life became difficult, she had me. Now she had a declined credit card and a leased SUV she couldn't afford. I told my mother